A father and his rebellious son. Paragraph 1. He provided well for his children, as would any loving parent. For many years he made sure that they were fed, clothed, and sheltered. When it was necessary, he disciplined them, but their punishment was never excessive. It was always administered to the proper degree. Jeremiah 30:11. We can only imagine then the pain that this loving father feels at having to make the statement, "Sons I have brought up and raised, but they themselves have revolted against me." Isaiah 1 2b. Paragraph 2. The rebellious sons referred to here are the people of Judah, and the aggravated father is Jehovah God. How tragic! Jehovah has nourished the Judeans and raised them to an elevated position among the nations. I went on to clothe you with an embroidered garment, and to shoe you with sealskin, and to wrap you in fine linen, and to cover you with costly material. He later reminds them through the prophet Ezekiel 16:10. Yet, for the most part, the people of Judah do not appreciate what Jehovah has done for them. Instead, they rebel or revolt. Paragraph 3. With good reason, Jehovah prefaces these words regarding his rebellious sons with the statement, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for Jehovah himself has spoken." Isaiah 1 2. Centuries earlier, the heavens and the earth heard, as it were, the Israelites received explicit warnings regarding the consequences of disobedience. Moses said, I do take as witness against you today the heavens and the earth, that you will positively perish in a hurry from off the land to which you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of it. Deuteronomy 4:26. Now in Isaiah's day, Jehovah calls upon the invisible heavens and the visible earth to bear witness to Judah's revolt. Paragraph 4. The severity of the situation calls for a straightforward approach. Even in these dire circumstances, however, it is noteworthy and heartwarming that Jehovah presents himself to Judah as a loving parent rather than merely the owner who has purchased them. In effect, Jehovah is entreating his people to consider the matter from the standpoint of a father who is in anguish over his wayward sons. Perhaps some parents in Judah can even personally relate to such a predicament and are moved by the analogy. In any event, Jehovah is about to state his case against Judah. Paragraph 5. Brute beasts know better. Through Jehovah, through Isaiah, Jehovah says, "A bull well knows its buyer, and the ass the manger of its owner. Israel itself is not known. My own people have not behaved understandingly." Isaiah 1 3. The bull and the ass are draft animals, familiar to those living in the Mideast. Indeed, the Judeans would not deny that even these lowly beasts display a sense of faithfulness, a keen awareness that they belong to a master. In this regard, consider what one Bible researcher witnessed at the close of the day in the Middle East, in a Middle Eastern city. No sooner had the drove got within the walls than it began to disperse. Every ox knew perfectly well his owner and the way to his house, nor did it get bewildered for a moment in the mazes of the narrow and crooked alleys. As for the ass, he walked straight to the door and up to his master's crib. Paragraph 6. Since such scenes are no doubt common in Isaiah's day, the people of Jehovah's message is clear. Even if even a brute beast recognizes its master and its own manger, what excuse can the people of Judah offer for having left Jehovah? Truly, they have not behaved understandingly. It is as if they have no consciousness of the fact that their prosperity and their existence depend upon Jehovah. It is indeed an evidence of mercy that Jehovah still refers to the Judeans as my people. Paragraph 7. Never would we want to behave without understanding by failing to show appreciation for all that Jehovah has done for us. Instead, we should imitate the psalmist David, who said, "I will laud you, O Jehovah, with all my heart. I will declare all your wonderful works." Psalm 9:1. Continually taking in knowledge of Jehovah would encourage us in this regard. For the Bible states that the knowledge of the most Holy One is what understanding is. Proverbs 9:10. Meditating daily on Jehovah's blessings will help us to be thankful and not take our Heavenly Father for granted. Colossians 3:15. The one offering thanksgiving as his sacrifice is the one that glorifies me, says Jehovah. And as for the one keeping a set away, I will cause him to see salvation by God. Psalm 50:23, paragraph 8. A shocking affront to the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah continues his message with strong words for the nation of Judah. Woe to the sinful nation, the people heavy with error. An evil-doing seed, ruinous sons. They have left Jehovah. They have treated the Holy One of Israel left Jehovah. With disrespect. They have turned backwards. Isaiah 1:4. Wicked deeds can accumulate to the extent that they become like a crushing weight. In Abraham's day, Jehovah describes the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah as very heavy. Genesis 18:20. Sometimes similar is now evident to the people of Judah, for Isaiah says they are heavy with error. In addition, he calls them an evil-doing seed, ruinous sons. Yes, the Judeans are like delinquent children. They have turned backwards. Or as the New Revised Standard Version puts it, they have utterly estranged from their father. Paragraph 9. By their wayward course, the people of Judah are showing gross disrespect for the Holy One of Israel. What is the significance of this phrase, which is found 25 times in the book of Isaiah? To be holy means to be clean and pure. Jehovah is holy to the superlative degree. Isaiah 4:8. The Israelites are reminded of this fact every time they observe the words engraved on the shining gold plate on the high priest turban. Holiness belongs to Jehovah. Exodus 39:30. Hence, by referring to Jehovah as the Holy One of Israel, Isaiah underscores the gravity of Judah's sin. Why these rebels are directly violating the command given to their forefathers. You must sanctify yourselves, and you must prove yourselves holy, because I am holy. Leviticus 11:44. Paragraph 10. Christians today must at all costs avoid following Judah's example of disrespecting the Holy One of Israel. They must imitate Jehovah's holiness. 1 Peter 1:15-16. And they need to hate what is bad. Psalm 97:10. Such unclean practices as sexual immorality, idolatry, thievery, and drunkenness can corrupt the Christian congregation. That is why those who refuse to stop practicing these things are disfellowshipped from the congregation. Ultimately, those who unrepentantly follow a course of uncleanness will be excluded from enjoying the blessing of God's kingdom government. Really, all such wicked works can constitute a shocking affront to the Holy One of Israel. Romans 1:26-7, 1 Corinthians 5:6-11, chapters 6, 9, and 10. Sick from head to toe. Paragraph 11. Isaiah next strives to reason with the people of Judah by pointing out to them their sickly state. He says, "Where else will you be struck still more, and that you add more revolt?" In effect, Isaiah is asking them, have you not suffered enough? Why bring further harm to yourself by continuing to rebel? Isaiah continues, the whole head is in a sick condition, and the whole heart is feeble. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no sound spot in it. Isaiah 1:5-6a. Judah is in a loathsome diseased state, spiritually sick from head to toe. A grim diagnosis indeed. Paragraph 10. Should we feel sorry for Judah? Hardly. Centuries earlier, the entire nation of Israel was duly warned about the penalty for disobedience. In part, they were told, Jehovah will strike you with the malignant boil upon both knees and both legs, from which you will not be able to be healed, from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head. Deuteronomy 28:35. In a figurative sense, Judah is now suffering these very consequences of her stubborn course, and all of this could have been avoided if the people of Judah had simply obeyed Jehovah. Paragraph 13. Isaiah continues to describe Judah's pitiable state. Wounds and bruises and fresh stripes, they have not been squeezed out or bound up, nor has there been a softening with oil. Isaiah 1:6b. Here the prophet refers to three types of injuries: wounds, cuts such as those inflicted by a sword or a knife; bruises, welts resulting from beating; and fresh stripes, recent open sores that seem beyond healing. The idea presented is that of a man who has been severely punished in every manner imaginable, with no part of his body escaping harm. Judah is truly in a broken down state. Paragraph 14. Does Judah's miserable condition move her to to return to Jehovah? No. Judah is like the rebel described at Proverbs 29:1. A man repeatedly reproved, but making his neck hard, will suddenly be broken, and that without a healing. The nation seems beyond curing. As Isaiah puts it, her wounds have not been squeezed out or bound up, nor has there been a softening with oil. In a sense, Judah resembles an open, unbandaged, all-pervasive sore. Paragraph 15. Taking a lesson from Judah, we must be on guard against spiritual sickness. Like physical illness, it can affect any one of us. After all, who of us is not susceptible to fleshly desire? Greed and the desire for excessive pleasure can take root in our hearts. Hence, we need to train ourselves to abhor what is wicked and cling to what is good. Romans 12:9. We also need to cultivate the fruits of God's Spirit in our everyday lives. Galatians 5:22-23. By doing so, we will avoid the condition that plagued Judah, that of being spiritually sick from head to foot. Paragraph 16. A desolated land. Isaiah now leaves his medical analogy and turns to the condition of Judah's terrain, as if he is gazing down on a battle-scarred plain. He says, "Your land is a desolation. Your cities are burned with fire. Your ground, right in front of you, strangers are eating it up, and the desolation is like an overthrow by strangers." Isaiah 1:7. Some scholars say that although these words are found early in Isaiah's book, they are probably uttered later in the prophet's career, perhaps during the reign of wicked King Ahaz. They assert that Uzziah's reign was too prosperous to justify such a bleak description. Granted, it cannot be stated with certainty whether Isaiah's book is compiled in chronological order. However, Isaiah's words about desolation are probably prophetic. In uttering the above statement, most likely Isaiah is employing a technique found elsewhere in the Bible, that of describing a future event as if it has already taken place, thus emphasizing the certainty of a prophetic fulfillment. Revelation 11:15. Paragraph 17. In any event, the prophetic description of the desolation of Judah should not come as a surprise to this stubborn and disobedient people. Centuries earlier, Jehovah warned them of what would happen if they rebelled. He said, "I, for my part, will lay the land desolate, and your enemies who are dwelling in it will simply stare in amazement over it. And you I shall scatter among the nations, and I will unsheath the sword after you. And your land must become a desolation, and your cities will become a desolate ruin." Leviticus 26:32 and 33. 1 Kings 9:6-8. Paragraph 18. The words of Isaiah 1:7 and 8 are apparently fulfilled during the invasion by Assyria that resulted in the destruction of Israel and widespread destruction and suffering in Judah. 2 Kings 17:15, 18, 18:11, 13, 2 Chronicles 29:8 and 9. However, Judah is not totally wiped out. Isaiah says, "The daughter of Zion has been left remaining like a booth in a vineyard, like a lookout hut in a field of cucumbers, like a blockade city." Isaiah 1:8. Paragraph 19. Amid all the devastation, the daughter of Zion, Jerusalem, will be left standing. But she will look very vulnerable, like a shanty in a vineyard or a watchman's booth in a cucumber field. In a journey down the Nile, one 19th century scholar was reminded of Isaiah's words when he saw similar booths, which he described as little more than a fence against north wind. In Judah, when the harvest was over, these booths were allowed to fall apart and collapse. Still, as flimsy as Jerusalem might appear before all-conquering Assyria army, she will survive. Paragraph 20. Isaiah concludes this prophetic statement: "Unless Jehovah of armies himself is left remaining to us just a few survivals, we should have become just like Sodom. We should have resembled Gomorrah itself." Isaiah 1:9. Against the might of Assyria, Jehovah will finally come to Judah's aid. Unlike Sodom and Gomorrah, Judah will not be obliterated. It will live on. More than 100 years later, paragraph 21, more than 100 years later, Judah was again under threat. The people had not learned from the discipline inflicted through Assyria. They were continually making jest at the messengers of the true God and despising his words and mocking at his prophets. As a result, the rage of Jehovah came against his people until there was no healing. 2 Chronicles 36:16. The Babylonian monarch Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah, and this time there was nothing remaining. Like a booth in a vineyard, even Jerusalem was destroyed. 2 Chronicles 36:17-21. Still Jehovah left a few remaining. Even though Judah endured 17 years in exile, Jehovah ensured the continuance of the nation, and especially of the Davidic line, which would produce the promised Messiah. Paragraph 22. In the first century, Israel went through its final crisis as God's covenant people. When Jesus presented himself as the promised Messiah, the nation rejected him. As a result, Jehovah rejected them. Matthew 21:43, chapter 23:37-39, John 1:11. Was this the end of Jehovah's having a special nation on earth? No. The Apostle Paul showed that Isaiah 1:9 had yet another fulfillment. Quoting from the Septuagint version, he wrote, "Just as Isaiah had said aforetime, unless Jehovah of armies had left the sea to us, we should have become just like Sodom, and we should have been made just like Gomorrah." Paragraph 23. This time the survivors were the anointed Christians who put faith in Jesus Christ. They were, first of all, believing Jews. Later they were joined by believing Gentiles. Together they made up a new Israel, the Israel of God. Galatians 6:16, Romans 2:29. This seed survived the destruction of the Jewish system of things in 70 CE. Indeed, the Israel of God is still with us today. It has now been joined by millions of believing individuals by the nations, who make up a great crowd which no man is able to number, out of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues. Revelation 7:9. Soon this world will face the battle of Armageddon. Revelation 16:14-16. While this will be a crisis greater than either the Assyrian or the Babylonian invasion of Judah, greater even than the Roman devastation of Judah in 70 CE, there will be survivors. Revelation 14. How vital then that all consider carefully Isaiah's words to Judah. They meant survival for faithful ones back then, and they can mean survival for believing ones today.